For centuries, there's been this one single question that has absolutely obsessed scholars, theologians, and historians. Who was the real Jesus? Today, we're diving into the work of two modern intellectual heavyweights, N.T. Wright and John Dominic Crossan. And let me tell you, they give us two profoundly different answers, creating a kind of revision guide for one of history's most compelling figures.
So, right, this is the fundamental question, isn't it? If you could just peel away 2,000 years of theology, tradition, and art, who was the actual man who walked the roads of Galilee? That's the core challenge. And our two guides for today, Wright and Crossan, offer two radically different roadmaps to try and find an answer.
All right, first up, we've got N.T. Wright. For Wright, you simply cannot understand Jesus unless you see him as the grand climax of Israel's long story. He argues that Jesus wasn't just some wise teacher. No, he was a prophet who consciously, deliberately believed he was the true Messiah, the one who would finally fulfill God's ancient promises to his people. But to really get how he arrives at that conclusion, we've got to look at his method first.
Okay, so at the absolute heart of Wright's work is this idea called critical realism. Think of it as a kind of philosophical middle ground. On one hand, it says, yes, of course, a real past objectively existed. But, and this is key, it also admits that we can never see that past with totally neutral eyes. We're always looking through the lens of our own biases. So the goal isn't to pretend we have no bias, but to be critical of our own perspective while still believing we can know something real about what happened.
So what does that philosophy actually look like in practice? Well, Wright says that instead of pretending we're totally neutral, the first step is to just admit we have a worldview. Only then can we enter into a genuine dialogue with the worldview of the ancient texts. It becomes this back and forth, a process of coming up with a hypothesis, like, okay, what if Jesus saw himself this way? And then you test it. You push it up against all the evidence to see if it provides the most coherent, most sensible explanation of all the data.
So when Wright actually applies this method to the Gospels, what does he find? Well, he concludes that Jesus was just so deeply rooted in his Jewish context, expecting God's kingdom to break into the world at any moment. He acted and spoke like someone who truly believed he was the Messiah. But, and this is the absolute game changer in Wright's view, he radically reinterpreted what Messiah even meant. Instead of being some military conqueror, he saw his role as one of suffering and dying to bring about God's redemption. For Wright, the resurrection was the real historical event that proved to his followers that this crazy new idea was actually correct. And this quote, this just perfectly captures Wright's whole thing. For him, history and faith are not enemies. They're essential partners. History is what grounds faith in reality, right? It stops it from just becoming a fairy tale. But at the same time, faith gives history purpose. It stops it from being just a dry, dusty collection of old facts. Okay, now let's just switch gears completely and turn to John Dominic Crossan. Because if Wright sees Jesus as the climax of a theological story, Crossan sees him as a product of his brutal social and political world. For Crossan, Jesus was not some divine figure planning his own heroic death. He was a radical peasant, organizing a social revolution.
Crossan's method is, well, it's way broader, and a lot of people would say it's more radical. He pulls in evidence from cross-cultural anthropology to try and figure out what life was really like for a peasant back then. He dives deep into Roman history to make you feel the oppressive weight of the empire. And this is crucial. He doesn't just stick to the four Gospels in the Bible. He argues that other texts, like the apocryphal Gospel of Thomas, might actually give us an earlier, more direct window into what Jesus was originally teaching.
So for Crossan, the most important thing, the thing you have to get right, is the context. He argues that you have to see Jesus first and foremost as a Mediterranean Jewish peasant. His world was all about honor and shame, patronage, crushing taxes, and just the constant violent threat of the Roman Empire. In this view, Jesus' mission wasn't about fulfilling some ancient prophecy. It was a grassroots human response to the incredible suffering he saw all around him.
This quote really gets to the heart of Crossan's vision. He sees Jesus' whole movement as this radical social program. By sharing meals with outcasts, by offering free healing to anyone, Jesus was directly attacking the rigid social pyramids of his day. It was a revolution, but not a revolution of swords. It was a revolution of open table fellowship, a movement that just flat out ignored the distinctions between Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, man and woman. So there you have it. Two powerful, brilliant, but starkly different portraits of Jesus. On one side, the Messiah fulfilling Scripture. On the other, a social revolutionary subverting an empire. Let's actually put them side by side to see exactly where they diverge.
At the highest level, it really just comes down to the lens they're looking through. It's like Wright puts on the glasses of Jewish theology and covenant history. And when he does, everything Jesus does and says is an answer to the long story of Israel. Crossan, on the other hand, puts on the glasses of sociology and Roman imperial studies. So for him, everything Jesus does is a reaction against the power structures of his time.
This table really lays it all out and shows how those different starting lenses lead to completely different destinations. Look at their sources. Wright builds his case mainly on the 4 canonical Gospels. Crossan blows the dataset wide open to include apocryphal texts, and that one choice shapes everything else. Wright's Jesus is defined by his messianic identity and a mission to fulfill Jewish history. Crossan's Jesus is defined by his peasant status and a social mission to stand against Roman oppression. Every choice they make shapes that final portrait.
So you might be thinking, okay, this is a fascinating academic debate, but why does it actually matter to anyone outside of a university library? Well, it turns out it matters profoundly, because these historical portraits have huge, real-world implications.
Honestly, the portrait of Jesus you accept really shapes everything that follows. Is Christianity about a divine act of salvation that fulfills ancient scripture? Or is it about a radical social ethic of equality and justice that challenges the powers that be? Is faith about believing in a historical resurrection that happened 2,000 years ago? Or is it about committing yourself to a certain way of life, right here and now? These are not small questions. These 2 views of Jesus present 2 very different paths for what it even means to be a follower.
And ultimately, all of this leaves us with one final massive question. The incredible work of scholars like Wright and Crossan pushes us to ask, what are the limits of history when we're talking about a figure of faith like Jesus? They both use historical methods to paint a picture, but those pictures lead to completely different worlds. So it makes you wonder, where does the historian's job of sifting through evidence actually stop, and where does the individual's journey of faith, or for that matter, non-faith, truly begin?